Hello folks, it's Dr. Paul Rose again, and in this short presentation I'm going to talk to you about the common goldfish and the fancy goldfish too, about husbandry, care and management, how we should look after them properly and how we shouldn't look after them, because there are many myths around about how we should care for goldfish, and people think they're an easy to look after pet, whereas actually they can have some very specific requirements. So I've got two populations of goldfish. I've got one in this rather more ornamental large container, and I've also got some larger goldfish in a more traditional garden pond. But the basic care and the premise for their care is very similar regardless of the setup that you're using. Space, volume of water and a stable environment is key to keeping your goldfish nice and healthy.
Let's dive into my tub and have a look at the goldfish. This tub is about 450 litres, so it's relatively substantial. And I've got a range of different breeds of goldfish in here, from some single-tailed varieties, like the comet and the shabumpkin, to the fantail, aranda and ranchu. I keep this tub really well planted with oxygenating plants, like Elodia, as well as a dwarf water lily which provides shade and shelter for the fish in the summer. This natural planting also provides the goldfish with a range of live foods that appear in the tub naturally, and this is really good for their enrichment and also ensures they keep a really strong and vibrant colour pattern. Plants like the water lily and the oxygenators are essential to biological filtration. And here is the dwarf water lily flowering. This is really useful for ensuring that the water remains stable in terms of its chemistry. This tub is also filtered to make sure that any biological materials from the fish are removed to control the levels of ammonia, nitrate and nitrite. Goldfish are incredibly messy feeders, and filtration in any water body that contains them is essential. The double-tailed goldfish, like the ranchus and the arandas, are not cold tolerant, so mixing of the water and a small aquarium heater are needed if you keep these breeds outside in the wintertime. Otherwise, they should be brought inside into more stable climates. You might find some authorities suggesting that single-tailed and double-tailed goldfish should not be kept together, but so long as there is sufficient space, and so long as the fish have an unimpeded swimming area, so the double-tailed goldfish don't get caught in any plant material, you can get away with mixing different breeds together. Do keep an eye for any unwanted aggression or boisterous behaviour from the single-tailed goldfish when the weather gets warmer, as sometimes the double-tailed goldfish won't be able to keep up with them and might get pushed around. Certainly when the fish get larger, as in the case of this aquarium full of single-tailed goldfish, it would not be recommended to mix the double-tailed breeds with them. Double-tailed breeds, as they get aged, become very deep-bodied, and they've been bred for a more restricted swimming ability. So consequently, the differences in activity levels might be to the disadvantage of the double-tailed goldfish. But in this aquarium, again you can see the space and volume of water provided to the fish and the large unimpeded swimming area that the goldfish are congregating in. Also note the array of bubbling that is provided in the fish tank to strongly oxygenate the water, to keep a good water movement and to help with filtration. As I've already said, goldfish are incredibly messy, and that's one of the reasons why they do much better in a pond, particularly when they're large, compared to a fish tank. And this large naturalistic shoal of goldfish in this incredibly large pond shows you the reasons why they can be so active. Goldfish breed in the spring and summer. The males chase the females around, and that encourages the females to spawn. So these heightened levels of activity in warmer weather are when we are more likely to see aggression, potential bullying to the slower breeds from the faster swimming breeds. And this spawning behaviour can be predicted by changes to the fish's appearance. Male goldfish in the breeding season develop small white blobs called tubercles over their gill plates and the front edges of their pectoral fins. So look out for these small white bumps, and that's how you can tell the difference between the male and the female. The most ancestral breeds of goldfish have short, rounded tail fins, like the common goldfish you can see swimming at the front of this video. The goldfish was domesticated by the ancient Chinese around 1,000 years ago. It was first bred to be housed in large earthenware containers to decorate the gardens and outdoor areas of the imperial palaces of the Chinese emperors. But as developments to colour, shape and size moved on, so the goldfish was brought inside to be a decorative animal in indoor areas. And during the Tang dynasty, from AD 618 to AD 907, it became popular to breed goldfish in a range of gold, yellow and red colours, many of the colours that we still see today. The Ming dynasty of Chinese emperors, from 1368 to 1664, started to really raise populations of goldfish inside, and they began to develop the very first occurrences of the fancy-tailed goldfish. In 1603, the goldfish was introduced into Japan, and from there it spread into Europe, where it first appeared in Portugal in 1611. Why develop this yellow and orange fish in the first place? The first instances of domestication of the goldfish occurred from its ancestor, the golden carp, by the ancient Chinese, and the development of yellowfish was only restricted for the imperial family, the Chinese emperors, yellow being the colour of the emperor. No other people outside of the imperial family could use, wear or have things that were yellow in colour. Breeders therefore produced a wider range of orange goldfish to be available to the more general population. And certainly as the goldfish began to spread outside of imperial China to other countries in Asia and around the world, so we've seen this development of a whole range of different breeds. And here you can see in this diagram the major morphological differences between the short-tailed breeds, the common goldfish, the shabumpkin with its blue, orange, red and white mottled pattern, and the comet with its red and white patterning. Differences in shape and fin length compared to the fancy double-tailed breeds, the ranchu that lacks a dorsal fin, the bubble eye with these large fluid-filled sacs that have been bred to exist around the fish's eye, and the lionhead and the aranda with the big bobbly raspberry-like growths on top of their head. And we've also got some telescopic-eyed goldfish, like the black moor for example, whose eyes protrude outwards from the side of its head. These are much more sensitive breeds, and anything like your veiltail, black moor or celestial should definitely be kept in an indoor aquarium rather than a pond. It's not only the large fin length and deeper body size of these fancy breeds of goldfish that can impede how they move, but also changes to how they can see. So it's not fair to mix large schools of the single-tailed goldfish, the active swimmers, with the black moor or the bubble eye, or the breeds of these fish that might have more difficulty in navigating their way through the water column. And certainly in cases like this setup, again a much more naturalistic setting, the larger single-tailed goldfish are going to behave in a more wild-type ancestral manner and cope much more easily with a wider range of conditions compared to these more delicate, fancier breeds. So think about how the breeds are mixed, the space they are given, and the water conditions that they are provided with before different varieties of goldfish are kept in the same setup. However, in the 21st century, there is no excuse for keeping any form of goldfish, single or double-tailed, in an unfiltered bowl. There is simply not enough room, dissolved oxygen, or water surface area for the fish to survive comfortably. Goldfish require a lot of stimulation. They like to forage in the substrate of their fish tank or pond, and they will stir up all of the nutrients and detritus into the water column. Build-up of ammonia, nitrates and nitrites will happen very quickly in the small volume of unfiltered water in a goldfish bowl. So this type of setup is not to be encouraged. Goldfish must be housed in a large filtered aquarium or in a suitable outdoor enclosure such as a pond that allows them to perform all of their natural behaviours. When properly cared for and not housed in a bowl, your common goldfish can get very large and can live for an incredibly long time. Records of goldfish living into their 30s and 40s are sadly not common, mainly because people don't keep them properly in home aquaria. But left to their own devices and housed outdoors in a large body of water with stable conditions, monsters like this can appear. This photograph from Denmark's aquarium in Copenhagen shows you just how large a goldfish can get when housed properly, when left to its own devices, and when being provided with sufficient space and good quality oxygenated water that allows for normal growth and development. In some parts of the world, where goldfish are left alone, they can become an invasive species, and the reason for that is demonstrated by the size and sheer capacity for grubbing around in the environment that is demonstrated by the fish in that photograph. Here is my more natural environment for the goldfish that I keep. In this pond, I've got a couple of larger shabunkins, a comet and a common goldfish. There's also a few sticklebacks in here that have arrived naturally. The pond is well planted with a range of marginal plants like the yellow flowering marsh marigold and the flag iris, which are the large vertical pale green leaves that are just coming into flower. The pond also contains oxygenators that allow for good clear water to form, and a lily which takes out lots of the nutrients that the goldfish themselves stir up into the water column. The pond is also filtered to give a constant supply of clear running water to ensure, particularly in summer, oxygen levels stay high. A pond is probably the best way of keeping goldfish if you want to have them with you for 30 or 40 years. You can of course plant up the fish tank that you keep your goldfish in, but be aware their natural digging behaviour means that your planting probably won't look as beautiful as in this tropical setup where we've got freshwater fish that do not root around in the substrate. The carp family, to which goldfish belong to, find their food because they have a downward turned mouth that allows them to dig through the substrate. That can disturb the roots of plants very easily, so only the toughest and strongest plants that are well fixed into the substrate will survive. So do try to provide your goldfish with planting, but just be aware it might not last as long in an aquarium as it will in an environment like this, where this natural pond has the space for the goldfish to do their feeding and foraging actions without too much disturbance to the plants. And a well-planted, natural water body can be a home not just to your goldfish, but to a range of other organisms as well, such as the damselflies that you can see in this video. Thick clumps of vegetation you can see in this pond are also really good for breeding goldfish, because goldfish eggs are sticky, and the females, once they have released them and they've been fertilized by the males, will release the eggs over these plants where the eggs stick to them, and then the fry will develop. So in a natural pond, like you can see here, you also stand quite a good chance of your goldfish breeding naturally. Don't be surprised if you end up with a weird array of shapes, colours and sizes, because if you're not doing pedigree line breeding of the fish, everybody will be breeding together. Bowls for goldfish are so bad for their welfare simply because they don't provide enough dissolved oxygen that the fishes need for normal physiology, metabolism and respiration. As you fill a bowl, which is a sphere, up to the surface, you reduce the surface area where dissolved oxygen can pass across the meniscus into the water column. Even though you can increase the amount of dissolved oxygen by filling a bowl to its widest point, you are still restricting the fish's swimming abilities and you're not providing filtration. Practical Fish Keeping magazine has a really good article on why smaller bowls are not suitable for goldfish and why smaller nano-style fish tank setups are also inappropriate for these species too. It cannot be stressed enough the amount of space and good quality water that goldfish need to thrive. Nanosystems are those small fish tanks that have become increasingly popular in the hobby over the last decade or so. They are fine for small species such as tiny tetras or tropical shrimps, as you can see in the top photograph here. But nano setups for goldfish, even if they are filtered, still do not provide enough swimming space and the chance for the fish to grow and develop normally. So please avoid bowls, avoid nano setups for goldfish. A large aquarium of at least 3 feet, 1 meter in length, well filtered, or a garden pond are your best chances of providing a healthy environment for your goldfish to grow normally and achieve optimal standards of welfare. So why is filtration so important? I've already mentioned about the build-up of nitrate, nitrite and ammonia, which can be toxic and eventually cause the death of fish if they build up to extremely high levels. The nitrates, nitrite and ammonia occur in the water column because of the fish's normal physiology and excretion. Goldfish are also incredibly messy feeders. They have this downward turned mouth that I've already talked about, which means they grub around in the substrate and cause all of the particles in the substrate to be elevated into the water column, causing the water to become polluted. Now obviously this is a filtration setup from a large public aquarium, but you can see the principle in action, whereby the water is taken out of the fish tank, pumped through mechanical and biological filtration, and then returns to the fish tank, fresh and clean. This fresh and clean water will contain more oxygen, it will have a reduced load of nitrates, nitrite and ammonia, and therefore the fish can breathe more easily. Gill damage is one of the clear signs that fish are living in water that is polluted, and therefore it's uncomfortable and dangerous to them. You can replicate this style of filtration in your own domestic pond or fish tank using an internal canister filter which sits within the fish tank and contains materials both for biological and physical filtration, or using an external filter where water is pumped out of the fish tank through the filtration material and then back into the fish tank. Filters require attention to keep them clean and functioning well, and never wash your filter material under tap water. Always wash it in old aquarium water to preserve all of the friendly bacteria that performs the biological filtration, so that the filter can keep going once the sponges have been cleaned and the filtration replaced in the fish tank. And here is another example of a photograph from a public aquarium to give you some evidence for the type of habitat that goldfish would naturally come from. These wide, flowing streams and rivers where water is continuously replaced, where a lot of dissolved oxygen is present, and the goldfish have a large area of deep substrate to forage in. Think about the differences between this naturalistic setup and the artificial conditions of the goldfish bowl, and then think about why not many goldfish kept in these unsuitable containers can live to be 30 or 40 years old. You're caring for an animal that is relatively complex, that can live a long time and has some very specific requirements. Just because goldfish can be cheaply bought doesn't mean they're a disposable pet, and their needs should be met in exactly the same way as you would care for a dog, cat, rabbit, budgie, or any other domestic pet. Let's finish by talking about correct diet and nutrition. These are goldfish flakes, some of the commonest forms of complete diet for your goldfish. They're really good for the single-tailed breeds because they can collect the flakes from the surface of the water. But for the double-tailed fancy breeds, if they're collecting food from the water surface where they're gulping in excess air, this might affect their swim bladder and their buoyancy. So the double-tailed goldfish are best fed on a bespoke goldfish pellet. And here is an example of a goldfish pellet. This is a sinking pellet which, when used correctly, falls through the water column and encourages foraging behaviour away from the surface. This is really good for the double-tailed breeds. When we provide the sinking pellet, you can see that the fish automatically follow it down, and therefore they're not taking in excess air when they're foraging. This provides a healthier diet for these double-tailed breeds. In fact, a rule of thumb when feeding any species of fish in captivity is to look at where its mouth is pointing. And this is a point I've raised several times throughout this video. This is a common carp, closely related to the common goldfish. But you can see quite clearly in this picture the fish's downward protruding mouth as it forages through the substrate. These sinking pellets not only are more beneficial for these fancy goldfish, also stimulate more natural feeding and foraging behaviours. However, in a pond where you might be wanting to check on your fish, where you can't see them as well underwater, and you can't see them eating as well as you can in a fish tank, floating pellets might be more appropriate for the fish keeper to be able to check on their fish and make sure everyone's eating. But please remember, any floating food for fancy goldfish, the double-tailed breeds, increases the likelihood of swim bladder and buoyancy problems because of the extra air they take in when they're feeding from the surface. So a mixture of different floating and sinking types is best for the fish's health and welfare over the long term. And whilst we're talking about carp, some of you are probably aware of the fancy varieties of carp called koi, which have been developed over a similar time frame as we have for the domestic goldfish. Koi are incredibly expensive. They come in a range of colours, and these colours are highly sought after by breeders. Koi carp are much more specialised than goldfish, and ideally should always be kept in a pond with at least a 3 foot 1 metre depth. Koi are messy feeders, much messier than the goldfish. They require excellent filtration, excellent high levels of oxygen in the water, and ideally UV sterilisation of their water to keep them healthy and free from parasites and other diseases. Moving on from goldfish to koi is the next obvious step in cold water fish care and fish keeping. So goldfish are a really good starting point for these more difficult to look after breeds. I hope this presentation has provided you with some basic information on the natural ecology of the goldfish and how this should inform its management. Just because it looks like a simple animal doesn't mean it's simple to care for, and it should be provided with a relevant, evidence-based husbandry in the same way as all of the other types of animals we keep as domestic pets, in zoological collections, and anywhere that such species are displayed. Thank you very much.